本日は ISAP2024 内の
Good
独立
afternoon,
行政法人環境
and thank you very much for joining us for the ISAP 2024 online meeting hosted by Erica, entitled To Realize Net Zero in Asia, Methodologies of Support for Implementing Climate Change Mitigation Plans. Before we start the session, we have a few reminders for the participants. In this meeting, we have simultaneous interpretation service between Japanese and English languages for those participating from overseas. Please click on the interpretation button from the meeting controls to select the language of your choice. We also ask participants to refrain from taking video or audio recordings of this meeting, including screenshots, except for those who have been authorized by the Secretariat. After exiting Zoom, you will see a survey shown, and we hope that you would help to respond to the survey for future feedback. In starting the online session to realize net zero in Asia, methodologies of support for implementing climate change mitigation plans, I'd first like to call on Mr. Tojo Junji, Executive Managing Director of ERICA, for opening remarks.
独立行政法人環境再生保全機構環境研究総合推進部の東條でございます。
Good afternoon. I'm Tojo. I'm the Executive Management Director of Environmental Restoration and Conservation Agency. ERICA is an incorporated administrative agency under the supervision of the Ministry of the Environment of Japan, and we work on various activities such as compensation for sufferers of health hazards caused by pollution, supporting private organizations which work on environmental conservation, etc. Among those programs, our Environmental Research and Technology Development Fund, ERDF, distributes approximately 5 billion JPY annually to researchers with the aim of promoting environmental and technology research which contribute to environmental policies. Research contributing to climate change measures, conservation of biodiversity, and technology for efficient collection and recycling of resources, and various other researches and technology development projects receive funding from ERDF, and the outcomes are reflected into Japan's environmental policies. In this ISAP 2024 online meeting, we focus on climate change mitigation measures to present the outcomes of the research done. In international society, based on the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change adopted in 1992, the Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC has been held every year since 1995, with the objective of reducing greenhouse gas emissions effectively worldwide. Vigorous discussions have been conducted with the aim of realizing this goal. Under these circumstances, at COP21 held in Paris, France in December 2015, a new international framework was proposed and adopted as the Paris Agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from 2020 onwards. The Paris Agreement requires all participating countries and regions, including developing countries, to set greenhouse gas reduction and control targets for 2020 and beyond. It also stipulates that parties must make efforts to prepare and submit a long-term low-emission acceleration strategy. Against this background, it is critical to realize a net-zero climate-neutral society. We have seen some progress so far, but each country has different challenges and constraints, which makes it difficult to achieve this goal. Also, analysis of potential serious impact that climate change mitigation measures may have on sustainability of human society and ecosystems need to take place. And in order to achieve net zero, the feasibility and difficulty of those plans and measures need to be reviewed. The four speakers today have leveraged the Environment Research and Technology Development Fund, ERDF, for their research regarding these challenges, and their insights help lead to solving climate change problems in Asia. We hope participants will also actively take part in the discussions through the Q&A. Thank you. Thank you. So now I would like to move on to how to proceed with the speaker presentations. We will have a panel discussion after the four presentations, in which the presenters will be responding to the Q&A questions that participants will be sending through the QA function. Please specify all panelists for your question. Also state to whom your question is directed, and then let us know your questions through the Q&A functionality of Zoom. Also, please state your name and affiliation together with your question. Also, please note that in the interest of time, we may not be able to answer all questions. Thank you for your kind understanding.
So we will start with the presentation. The first one is under the theme of exploring a path to achieving net zero emissions without compromising the sustainability of human society and ecosystems. We have here with us Mr. Kiyoshi Takahashi from National Institute for Environmental Studies. Mr. Takahashi, over to you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind introduction. I am Takahashi from National Institute for Environmental Studies. Related to the theme of this meeting, I would like to share with you some research findings that was a research that was conducted in years 2020 to 2022 under the theme of global analyses of climate mitigation for achieving net zero emissions and sustainable development. I, Takahashi, will be presenting the research results, but this project was done by 4 organizations and institutions, including NIES, Kyoto University, Ritsumeikan University, Forestry and Forest Products Research Institute. So the need to achieve the 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees target will be necessary to achieve net zero emissions. That understanding is widely shared among people with the overall trend towards decarbonization. On the other hand, the feasibility and difficulty of achieving net zero emissions and would require further examination. For instance, net zero emissions and negative emissions would require large-scale afforestation and bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, but a lot is still unknown about these measures. The social transformation for decarbonization will have good synergy effects in terms of SDGs, but would also bring about negative effects or trade-offs. So that we have set forth the research objective as stated on the following slide. So the research objective is to provide an answer to the question, what kind of society will we create and accept in order to achieve net zero emissions without compromising the sustainability of human society and ecosystem in a form that can be understood by citizens and policymakers. So to achieve this research objective, we have set as the research goals, analysis of emission pathways corresponding to climate goals and socioeconomic development path, integrated assessment of climate impacts that quantitatively considers the uncertainties of social and climate change, and strategic consideration of climate mitigation measures that take sustainability into account. Based on various analysis done in the research project, we have highlighted as key messages shown on this slide. So the mitigation for the 1.5 to 2 degrees target may have negative spillover effects on SDGs, and additional policies are needed to mitigate them. And another key message is to simultaneously achieve SDGs and climate goals. International cooperation and the transformation of food systems would be the keys. And the extreme weather events can be quite severe, and therefore we need additional adaptation measures. I will share with you some of the research outcomes that serve as the basis for the key messages. As for the analysis on the intergenerational and regional inequality of climate impact, we have proposed the scenario where climate change mitigation does not progress well, with the scenario of RSV 8.5. And as a result, we have found that in certain tropical areas, the grandchild that lives for 80 years from 22 to 2100 would experience 1,000 days of extreme hot days and 5 days of heavy rains that their parents would never experience in their lifetime of 80 years from 1960 to 2040. Also, through the comparison of extreme hot days and the per capita GDP and CO2 emissions, we have come to the conclusion that the poorer, low CO2 emissions countries would lose out more. On the other hand, if the 2 degrees target can be achieved, then it will lead to the correction of inequality. And so the intergenerational inequality was depicted under major climate change, but intergeneration and regional disparity can be corrected if the climate goal can be attained. Another example is the impact of wildfire. So not just the climate factors, but we have come up with a model that would take into account the population density and economic activities. And using this model, we predicted the occurrence of wildfire and the emissions of CO2 and aerosol. And we have also projected the future human health impact caused by PM 2.5 that will be further emitted by wildfire. As the economy develops, the occurrence of the wildfire can be reduced as better wildfire management would take place. But with the major climate change being taken as an assumption, with the rise of temperature and the rainfall changes, the biomass will become drier and will result in higher risk of occurrence of wildfire. And also, in terms of human health impact, with the larger climate change towards the end of the 21st degree, the wildfire mortality would rise at high latitude. We also need to further our understanding on the impact and the preparedness of the extreme weather events, not just average climate change. In our research results, we have taken into account the uncertainties of the crop model and the future climate and estimated the impact on the food security. I will skip the details, but in regions such as South Asia, where it is vulnerable to climate change, it would require 3 times the food reserve as the current level. So up to now, I have shared with you the scenarios on the climate impact for both successful and unsuccessful decarbonization efforts. We also estimated the impact on the SDGs that would be brought forward with the efforts for decarbonization. The decarbonization and the climate change issue resolution are the uncompromisable societal goals, but that would also have ripple effects on poverty, hunger, health, and biodiversity. So there are good co-benefits as well as trade-offs. This slide talks about the research that was conducted about 10 years ago. With climate change, it would have an impact on reduced crop yields, which would raise the market price and would lead to lower consumption, and that can lead to malnutrition and hunger in poor countries. On the other hand, if you were to realize the net zero and decarbonization, you can reduce the impact of the crop yields being reduced, but due to the increased expenses due to emissions reduction and the competition for land for bioenergy crops, the crops prices would also rise, and that will result in a heightened risk of malnutrition and hunger. So the trade-off could be brought about unintentionally as a result of climate policies toward decarbonization, which is implemented with good intention. 10 years ago, when we published this research results, there was strong pushback from the society because it was counterintuitive that it would increase the risk of hunger as a result of decarbonization policies, which are supposed to be good for the society. This can potentially serve as the grounds for the assertion that the decarbonization efforts should be stopped. developed. However, that interpretation is incorrect. Decarbonization pursuit of decarbonization is not just for food, hunger, but also would be beneficial for preventing heat strokes and also ecosystem and water resources impacts. What's important is that you need to thoroughly understand the potential impact and the ripple effect, and the additional measures should be squarely discussed because the decarbonization policies can bring about negative impact as well. Thereafter, regarding a trade-off effect on food security as a result of decarbonization measures, such impacts were confirmed in various research projects in various countries. So in this particular research project, we have compared the result of such research projects, and we're able to do the attribution analysis. In the interest of time, I will skip the details of the explanation, but we did the analysis of the biodiversity coming from the climate change and the land use change. As a result, we have come to the conclusion that the regions that rely more on the carbon sequestering and the afforestation or land use change would result in greater loss of diversity. This slide talks about climate change and climate change mitigation and decarbonization policies having implications on the achievement of SDGs. We've conjoined several model tools, and we have looked at the impact of the achievement SDGs in terms of the climate mitigations and other societal and environmental changes. In certain cases of SDGs indications, the impact on the health impact mitigation due to air pollution and energy self-sufficiency improvement can be expected as synergy effect of decarbonization efforts, but regarding elimination of hunger and biodiversity conservation, trade-off was concerned. So by showing a co-benefit and trade-off in the pursuit of decarbonization, we need to pay particular attention to trade-off, and decarbonization and several SDGs should be pursued. So we have not come to the comprehensive and full initiatives on that point, but we did some work. This slide is one example. So this suggests that in countries where the red meat consumption per capita is too huge, in terms of the food makeup, the consumption of red meat, if that can be substituted with the consumption of small pelagic fish such as sardines and mackerel, then this will have a positive impact on the health promotion and GHG gas emission reductions. Also, in relation to the elimination of poverty, one analysis was done on using the carbon tax and transferring that to reduce poverty. I won't go into the detail of that explanation, but these research results are quite based on quite a large scale in terms of spatial and temporal framework. So this will not have immediate impact on the company's behavior or administrative policies, but we could contribute to global climate targets through IPCC reports by publishing the articles in international academic journals. In addition to that, we were involved in outreach activities to enhance the understanding of the Paris Agreement and the net zero pathways for the national goals. More specifically, we were engaged in various fora to publicize the research outcome, holding webinar series, taking into account the intergenerational inequality discussion, inviting high school and college students. This is the last slide, and this is basically the same as the key message slide that was shown at the beginning. Once again, we made the research objective as providing an answer to the question, what kind of society will we create and accept in order to achieve net zero emissions without compromising the sustainability of human society and ecosystems? So each research project is based or targeting the entire globe. So there are some issues remaining with the accuracy of the various measures to be taken into consideration. And we are not necessarily covering the entire area of climate impact and the climate mitigation ripple effects. On the other hand, long-term but swift actions need to be taken against climate change, and in order to have further understanding on the part of society, we are working on the remaining or succeeding research issues regarding certain challenges. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
The next presentation is entitled Results and Roles of Research on Decarbonization Scenario Development in Asia, and the presenter is Dr. Masui Toshihiko, Director of Social Systems Division, National Institute for Environmental Studies. Thank you for your kind introduction. I'm Masui from the National Institute for Environmental Studies. So I hope you can see the screen. Yes, we can see your screen. So my presentation is entitled Results and Roles of Research on Decarbonization Scenario Development in Asia. So using the funds provided by ERCA, we have been working with Asian counterparts on the research which I would like to present today. I'm very grateful to be given the opportunity to present. So as Dr. Takahashi said, we have the 1.2 degrees or 2 degrees targets set in the Paris Agreement. And in order to realize these targets, by 2050, greenhouse gas emissions in the world have to be reduced. On the other hand, when we look at the current initiatives in place, all of those together will only keep the emissions flat. And so there's a big gap between our aspirations and what the actions we are working on. So when we look at the historical emissions in Asia, in 1970, Asia only comprised around 20% of global emissions, but now Asia comprises half of global GHG emissions in 2023. So efforts for climate mitigation in Asia is very important. And many countries in Asia have come up with initiatives in order to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. They have NDCs targeting certain levels by 2030, 2050, etc. Various countries are working on this. And also, there are discussions leading up to 2050 and the society beyond 2050. So you can see highlighted in some colors, these are the countries where they have long-term goals up until 2050, and they have already submitted their reports to the United Nations. Of course, Japan has also set up the reduction of GHG emissions as an important goal, and it aims to achieve net zero by 2050. This Monday, there has been a joint meeting between the Central Environment Council and the Industrial Structure Council, and the discussions are underway to set new targets, talking about what to do for 2040 onwards. So today, my presentation focuses on initiatives for Asia, but I would first like to talk about what's being done in Japan. NIES has been working together with Mizuho and other relevant entities, working on an end-use model and also the MOGPM model, and looking at the demand and supply for hourly electricity, and looking at how we can achieve a decarbonized society by 2050. And we've been analyzing some of the scenarios. As a result of the analysis, the NDC, which has a target up until 2030, as an extension of that NDC, we have the decarbonization technology progress scenario. There's also another scenario for innovative technology deployment, and also a third scenario in which there will be a social transformation leveraging ICT and circular economy, and aiming to achieve net zero through these initiatives. So in the Monday joint meeting, our team has presented not only this straight line going down, we see some less drastic measures, and also what if we take bolder measures in order to further reduce. The results of those simulations have been presented, and I was unable to incorporate those findings into this slide, but if you are interested, please look at them later. So innovative technology and also social transformation. By working to realize these initiatives, Japan hopes to be able to realize a decarbonized society by 2050 based on a computer simulated model. And we are also looking to expand the efforts to Asia using the ERDF fund from ERCA. So to provide some background, there have been some plans presented. Japan has also presented a package that looks to expand the scope of technical support provided to developing nations in Asia for the formulation of net zero targets with feasible measures using the AIM simulation model that Japan is using. So using the ERDF fund, we are working together with research institutions in Asia to conduct our analysis. In analyzing data in Asia, we did have some restrictions on data. So we have not tried to do the detailed level of analysis that we have done for Japan. We first look at what kind of a society should we be aiming for. We have used the extended snapshot tool in order to simulate the to-be picture for 2050 and 2060. And then based on that vision, what is the technology that can be employed in order to achieve net zero? In Japan, we have also used the end-use model, which we have also used for our analysis, looking at the technical pathways and coming up with a portfolio of the technologies that can be used. And also, when we employ those technologies and measures, what is the impact on the macroeconomic landscape? We use the CGE model to do that analysis. So using multiple models and combining them, we're able to come up with a roadmap for Asia for a decarbonized society. And we are providing that data to various governments in Asia. To give a specific example, in Thailand, our counterparts from the research team in Thammasat University have been working with us on various quantification exercises. This is a report that came out in 2022, and it talks about the long-term strategy for lower greenhouse gas emission development. So using the AIM model, we provided numerical information that helped to inform the strategy. In Indonesia, working with Bogor Agricultural University and Bandung Institute of Technology, we have been working with the researchers there to contribute data for the long-term strategy for Indonesia. We also have worked with counterparts in Vietnam and at this point in time, counterparts in Laos and Bangladesh, working with research institutions in these Asian countries to work on scenarios for future decarbonization in Asia and So we have been working with various research institutions in each country, and also inside of Japan, we have been working on various initiatives done in Japan, looking to see what would happen if we apply those initiatives to other Asian countries. So this is one example of our research that we did with Thailand. If we try to realize a decarbonized society by 2050, what are the initiatives that will be needed? So I mentioned earlier that we use the end-use model, looking at the necessary constraints and the ability to bring down the GHG emissions. What kind of technology would be needed in order to go to net zero? In case of Thailand, in the BAU scenario, under the end-use model, if there's no technological development, emissions will continue to rise. But if we take various measures, emissions can come down to net zero. For example, we have the hydrogen case, we have the electrification case, and the CCS case. These are mainly technologies that can be employed, and we have analyzed or evaluated the potential of each of them. A similar analysis has been done in Indonesia as well. For the technology fixed case, emissions will continue to rise. However, if we use hydrogen technology, electrification, and CCS, and take measures using these technologies, we have looked at how much of these technologies can be employed in order to bring emissions down to net zero. On the other hand, using the ERDF fund, we have also invited researchers from other countries to come for postdoc research. So these young researchers have been using our model to do the analyses. And we are also working to share that information. For example, we look at how the technology share of power supply would have an impact. In Thailand, the carbon neutral goal, the net zero scenarios. If we can realize this, what would be the impact? So using the CGE model, which is an economic model, we're trying to assess what will happen. At this point in time, we do not have enough measures to fill the gap between ambition and current status. And so the carbon pricing is set at high levels. Various initiatives and other measures can be used as reference in order to come up with more accurate analyses and research. In addition to these macro research, we are also working on more detailed analysis within the ERDF fund. Specifically, we look at what would happen if we employ masses of renewable energy in developing nations. Transport is still a major challenge. So we also have done analysis using the transport model. We also look at food demand and land use in our analysis, looking at more micro level analyses. And also using the end-use model and the CGE model, the economic model. Leveraging these models, we look at the pathways towards future net zero societies. So this is an example of analysis from passenger transport in Thailand. Now, the transport volume in Thailand has significantly decreased during the COVID pandemic, but the model suggests that the transport volume will make a significant recovery going forwards. And so the model shift that Thailand is considering, if we work on these initiatives, how much will we be able to reduce the GHG emissions from passenger transport in Thailand? That has been assessed using this model. This is still a conservative outlook. So we are still far away from net zero. So we do need additional measures, including introduction of EVs. And so research is currently progressing in this area. Also, for food demand, this is an example from research in Indonesia. At this point in time, there is the food demand level, which in future is expected to grow together with economic development. So from the perspective of agriculture and food demand, we look at how GHG emissions can be reduced. That has been analyzed. So here, in the agricultural sector, there can be some mitigation initiatives. There's also initiatives for sustainable, healthy consumption. By working on these initiatives, the GHG emissions, would they decrease compared to the current BAU scenario? So agroforestry and other various additional measures do need to be evaluated. So in terms of GHG emission reduction, the current initiatives may not be enough, but we are working together with various researchers from various countries on doing the evaluation. So we're working with various researchers in Asia on this research. And also researchers from Asia are directly providing some of the research findings to their government. And the data can be leveraged in government documentations. We are doing our research with the aim of contributing to that. And so the Ministry of the Environment of Japan and embassies from respective countries and JICA are working together with us to think of how effectively we can work on the research and also contribute the findings of the research to each government. So we are not ending our initiative with just doing research. We have been developing tools which we are providing to young researchers in each country. Also, the findings of the research are also being provided to governments in Asia. So recently, because of the COVID pandemic, it has been difficult to conduct face-to-face meetings. We have fewer face-to-face meetings. But after the pandemic, we have been working on model development training sessions and also actively working on supporting policy dialogues as well. So in this way, Asia's initiatives to reduce GHG gases is important for the entire world to be achieving net zero, but there's still a big gap between the net zero pathway and the current action. So there needs to be additional measures, and we need to do research on how we can set more ambitious measures. And we also need to look at the significance and benefits of those more ambitious measures. Also, we need to look at how we can introduce more ambitious measures into the real society. The current analysis is currently done for individual countries, but we should also look at the consistency among countries' net zero pathways in Asia and around the world to make sure that they are aligned. So we are working on analyses to make sure they are aligned. So we are working day and night to try and contribute to those goals. And in order for Japan to also take leadership in this area, we also need to work on further emission reduction targets for Japan as well. Our research is centered on Asia, but we also want to include how we can have more bolder initiatives for reducing emissions in Japan as well. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
We will move on to the third presentation entitled Implications for the Study on the Governance of Follow-up and Review for the Achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. This will be presented by Ms. Nobue Amanuma of IGES, or Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. Thank you very much. So this is Amanuma speaking from IGES. Today, I'd like to share with you the implications, the research project of implications from the study on the governance of follow-up and review for the achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals. I represent that project, and I'd also like to share with you the measures for net zero. So my research theme is not so much net zero, it's more SDGs and the governance around it. So my content of the presentation is slightly different from the presentations that preceded mine. SDGs governance can be quite helpful in considering governance framework for net zero. And in this research project, we talk about the stakeholders. So participation of stakeholders may be needed for the achievement of net zero. So hopefully this research will give you some insights. There's a lot of word used in this presentation, that is follow-up and review. So you can think of that as the same as monitoring. Today, I'd like to talk about 3 topics today. First is the background behind this research, and as a research outcome, the SDGs transformation, what kind of SDGs need to take place, and I will also talk about the follow-up review that can lead to transformation, and then I will talk about other themes and issues that can support the transformation. First, I will talk about lack of progress on SDGs and the need for transformation, which serves as the background for this research project. There are 17 targets, goals, and the targets under SDGs. But if you look at the report, only 17% of the overall have good track record or on target. And on the right hand, it shows the progress. So the topic is net zero, which is goal 13. And this goes to show that this is most behind in terms of progress on goals. This delay did not start now. Even before the project got started, this delay had been continuing, and the reasons behind that is lack of funding, COVID pandemic, this conflicts, etc. But at the same time, the mechanism for monitoring and evaluation of SDGs is weak and therefore is not contributing to enhancing measures for SDGs. So SDGs initiatives and the follow-up review should be initiated by the national government. Once every 4 years or so, the national governments are required to or recommended to do the voluntary national review, but there's high degree of flexibility, and in many countries this is not done effectively. The target for SDGs is 2030, but by 2030, in order to achieve SDGs, each country needs to set goals and indicators that are comparable with the SDG goals, and the progress needs to be evaluated properly so that it can be fed back to initiatives to promote SDGs further. And that is an urgent task. And therefore, as the research objective, we have looked at the national level follow-up review, and we try to identify the elements for effective follow-up review and try to come up with the better governance structure. So the goals are twofold. One is to come up with better ways to come up with the and strengthen the follow-up review, and second is to make recommendations to Japan for if you are a follow-up review at national level. So we have looked at various ways where the follow-up reviews are done in different countries. So that was the background behind the research project. Next, I would like to share with you the research outcomes. So at the national level SDGs initiatives, oftentimes we'll go through the policy cycle approach. In other words, there's the policy formulation, policy adoption, policy implementation, evaluation is done, and then it is fed into agenda setting and then policy formulation. So it goes through this cycle. With this approach, it is quite efficient and incremental improvements can be expected. On the other hand, it assumes that the existing system and approach are functioning well. I mentioned that the SDG progress is lacking. So in order to achieve SDGs, incremental improvement will be insufficient. To begin with, SDGs would require transform our world. So that's the theme, and ambitious goals and targets are set forth in our research. Looking at the countries that rank high in SDG achievement, Finland, Germany, Denmark, and in Indonesia, where initiatives are underway in Asia, we have come up with the follow-up review elements that can lead to transformation. So in this research project, we tried to gather some information on how follow-up review can be conducted. And we concluded that the follow-up review that may lead to transformation are responsive, embedded, and interactive. So to go over what these words mean, responsiveness refers to the ability to respond to new events and knowledge. So it's the architecture and activities that can incorporate such new elements. Embeddedness refers to the architecture and activities that embed SDGs concerns more broadly throughout society. Interactiveness refers to the architecture where knowledge from multiple stakeholders can be incorporated and would empower these stakeholders. So based on these three elements, we've tried to come up with the follow-up review and how that can be strengthened to lead to transformation. These support each other and would strengthen the evaluation of these policies. And at the same time, it can also support other parts. More specifically, what kind of initiatives are done in each of the countries? I'd like to show some examples. For instance, under the theme of the element of responsiveness, for instance, in Finland, regarding SDGs challenges, in order to pursue the solutions, they conduct various experiments. They try with smaller scale, they try at it, and if it doesn't work, then they'll try to work with another one. So the budget formulation reflects that kind of experimental initiatives. Another example is also found in Finland. The parliament is involved in SDGs, and the government initiatives are evaluated and makes requests. And these will continue until and unless the government responds to them and implements them. So this will really push for actions to be taken against SDGs on the part of the government. So that's some examples on responsiveness. Next is embeddedness. This is another example from Finland. From 2019 to 2023, under the current Prime Minister, or the Prime Minister then, they've come up with the SDGs fundings were earmarked. And in Denmark, they have SDG screening. So whether there will be an impact on SDGs would be determined. And then so impact will be felt for which goal and which targets, what kind of ripple effects are expected. This tool is used to evaluate those aspects. By doing so, by utilizing such tools, SDGs and sustainability can be embedded more widely and broadly in society. So that was an example of embeddedness. Next, some examples on interactiveness. In many countries, the government would put funding out so that third-party independent parties would do an objective review on the progress. And also, politicians, researchers, civil society individuals would be involved, and on a regular basis, regarding follow-up review, they would have discussions on multi-platform, multi-stakeholder platform. And I talked about voluntary national review, which is recommended to be done once every 4 years. Rather than completing that in just one country by conducting peer review, they will get new perspectives and they will improve their voluntary national review. So those are some examples of interactiveness. So responsive, embedded, and interactive institutions and activities should be enhanced, and that will lead to stronger follow-up review, FUR, and that should lead to greater likelihood of SDGs being achieved. Let me share with you other themes and issues that can support transformation. So effective, I talked about the governance elements that can be effective and can transform the society. In addition to that, in this research, we have looked at the participatory process for SDGs. And one of the research activities was to look at who would play important roles in the decision making. So there was research finding on that. So among the legislators, we looked at women and young legislators and the importance of representation of youth and women has been looked at. So if women and young politicians are important stakeholders in decision making in this research, by the impact of the stakeholders' involvement is limited. And in another research project, we looked at the youth in particular and of the SDGs process, how youth collectively are involved. So as a means to ensure the youth participation, it's mechanism that is institutionalized, and young or youth groups should be under umbrella organizations. So we've looked at the roles that such organizations can play and new and varied means of engagement, and also to identify the youth as the agents of change. We have come to the conclusion of the importance of that. And then also to raise the quality of stakeholders' involvement, we need to clarify the purpose of the engagement and to ensure transparency and accountability. So these four perspectives are important. So we have proposed the analytical framework comprised of these four elements. So the marginalized, weak stakeholders can be applicable as well for this framework. So this way, in order to enable the participation of the youth, it would require support, but at the same time, rather than looking at youth as passive recipients of care, we need to change the mindset to look at the youth as agents of change. We also pointed that out. Under this research project, there were other research that was conducted, and we've looked at national level governance and the stakeholder participation, or it was not limited to that. We have come to realize broader issues. So the achievement of SDGs, when it comes to that, the richer countries are better at achieving SDG goals, but the richer countries would have negative spillover effects on other countries. This diagram shows the per capita GDPs and the achievement rate of SDGs, and this graph shows that there's a positive correlation. So higher the SDG achievement, higher the ecological footprint. So that is suggested by this diagram. So developing countries, between developing countries and developed countries, the level of responsibility and the disparities, and also the socioeconomic disparities are indicated. So as was explained, in order to strengthen the SDGs follow-up review, the governance structure can be useful in thinking of governance for achieving net zero, and stakeholder participation is not just applicable for environmental issues, it can be applicable to various stakeholders at various stages of policy formulation. So in that context, the SDG stakeholder participation research outcomes can be useful. So that is all from me. Thank you very much.
We'll now move on to the fourth presentation, which is on the theme of regional innovation research approach toward carbon neutral regions and projects. The presenter is Professor Fuji Tatsuyoshi from the University of Tokyo. Thank you for your kind introduction. I'm Fujita from the Department of Urban Engineering from the University of Tokyo. I would like to talk about our research that helps inform a guideline for regional efforts for carbon neutrality. So as we heard in the previous presentations, in order to realize decarbonized regions, we believe that there are three major stages that need to happen. The first phase is to analyze the status quo. In this chart, you can see the far left part. We first need to diagnose the current status. Next, we need to rationally put together a future picture. So setting goals for carbon neutrality in 2050, we need to look at the characteristics of each region in order to come up with specific targets. Also, we need to look at what actions or programs will be put in place in the mid to long term. We also need to have demonstration projects that will help align the current status quo and the future vision. We believe these three steps are necessary. And so based on that concept, we have been working on a project from 2021 to do research among a coalition of 9 regional research institutions, including NIES and University of Tokyo. Each university and research institution has a partner municipality, and we help the municipality to create plans and implement programs. And we have been working on a 5-year research project to help form that guideline. And also in the ERDF fund, we are looking at analyzing the status quo through smart analysis and also looking at mechanisms that would help. So we are still in the middle of trying to create a guideline. It's an ongoing effort. We are working with 5 municipalities to work on these 3 stages on a planning and support system. And as mentioned before, on the far left, we have the first step was the diagnosis of the status quo. That includes carbon neutral related goals from the SDGs. We've identified some of those relevant targets, and we've done a participatory workshop in which participants select which indicator they would like to use in order to diagnose the situation in their region. Also on the far right, using a model, we try to simulate the future decarbonization scenarios. And then we work to bridge the future and the current status through projects. Specifically, we have been working with Shinchi Town in Fukushima Prefecture to create a plan. And I'd like to introduce the example of how the city planned for social implementation. We hope to generalize the findings from the project in order to create a guideline, and we're working among the 9 research institutions to make that happen. So in designing the future carbon neutral plan, as Dr. Masui said, we also used the AIM, and we created a regional version, a snapshot model for the region. And we call this the regional AIM. We built this model. And for example, looking at the Shinchi Town in Fukushima Prefecture's future scenario, Shinchi Town is a municipality with around 10,000 people in its population, and we worked with NIES, and Dr. Gomi from NIES led the effort to create the model. This is the simulation result. And I will just skip through these slides. So in case of Japan, similar to other advanced economies, we are seeing a decrease in the population. And so if we look at the depopulation as business as usual, then we also need to consider scenarios that help maintain the current population level. The top part shows the future predictions for the population. And so we need to look at scenarios that try to maintain the current population level while at the same time working on decarbonization efforts. So using the regional AIM model, we will be doing the simulation. In Shinji Town, they have used this data inside of discussions for reconstruction efforts. And instead of going for minus sum, they've been discussing how they can do reconstruction efforts with positive effects. So specifically, they've localized some of the initiatives. So there are multiple future scenarios put together for Shinji Town. So Shinji Town originally had hardly any impact from radioactive contamination from the Fukushima plant disaster, but they have had significant damage from tsunami. So the current decentralized, sprawling type of urban planning is what they would go for if they were to go for a BAU scenario. Now, as opposed to BAU, what if we try to make the town more compact and really leveraging some of the industrial sector? What if we worked on agriculture and also region, taking into consideration all of those things, and have citizens take part in the scenario building? We looked at the economic benefits, and we will look to calculate what we can expect. So based on the regional energy system, the city has incorporated into this basic policy for reconstruction what they were trying to do. Based on that, there are some, please go back to the slide before, we have some of the advanced efforts, thank you, that are underway. So as mentioned before, specific regional energy plans were part of the first set of city planning initiatives. As you can see, this is 20-hectare area, and in rebuilding the area, they have this symbolic area in front of the station where they are building a smart energy center, working to get on a plan together with architectural experts. So back in 2011, when the earthquake occurred, it was in 2011 when the earthquake occurred, and then 7 years later, the Shinji Smart Energy Center was worked on, working on a model where 9 private companies, in addition to the public sector, would be investing. In addition, the carbon neutral or energy plan program, and in order to formulate these programs, we not only need statistical information, because the statistical information alone is going to be difficult to do detailed analysis. So to do a simulation for the future in 2050, we need to cascade down into the detailed level initiatives. And so we need unaggregated data as well. That's why Shinji Town has these smart meters that help to collect the information. And half of the 9 research institutions are working together with us on a simple, feasible, cost-effective smart monitoring system. And we are considering doing a proof of concept. So Shinji Town has installed something that is a little bit more expensive. For 200 households, they have installed smart meters, and the information from the smart meters provide electricity data, which is used for feasibility study for energy. Currently, we're able to get data in 5-minute increments, and NIES is gathering that information so that we can validate some of the hypotheses that we have. Next slide, please. So if we do the smart monitoring, you can see there are certain impacts and effects. Using localized data, we are able to run the regional simulation model. So we can take into account regional characteristics and do simulation for future scenarios that are convincing to the local community. So you can customize the model. Another thing is to create the interface for monitoring. For example, from each household or from citizens, you will be able to get continuous information. And so Shinchi Town has used GPS technology and also did analysis on transportation as well, starting with the energy sector, looking to see what would happen if we have electric vehicles in place and possibly using the EVs as battery storage systems. Also, working on initiatives that could help citizens' behavioral change. So we will be able to do multiple layered analysis to analyze all of those things. And using this monitoring network, we can do a possible interactive kind of a simulation. So academically, interactive simulation has been worked on. And in municipalities that have gone ahead in this kind of simulation, although participation is voluntary, we can also have people who can join remotely in order to increase the citizen participation. And so we are trying to think of such a scheme. So creating a guideline system like you see on the left-hand side, starting with diagnosis and analysis of the region, and then moving on to creating a future scenario simulation, and then putting together a design for programs. This actually leverages the Ministry of the Environment, the Education Ministry's programs. And so we are also discussing potentially working with Asian counterparts as well. So this simulation for the future and also program development for the region would involve a list up of the technical inventory of various Japanese municipalities. We have listed up all of those technologies employed. This is part of them. You can see on the left-hand side, renewable scale, renewable energy, and then you can see on the right-hand side, industrial management initiatives. All of that can be included to create a menu of policies and technology so that Japanese cities can work with Asian cities and have bilateral government umbrellas to serve as an overarching initiative, and we can work with Asian research institutions to create a data platform. So it could be a bilateral or multilateral partnership. We are currently thinking of how we can realize this. So this could become helpful in working with countries like China and Malaysia in order to think of regional circulation. So having a national government level umbrella and then working between different municipalities and also working between academic participants and also have corporations take part. Or we're trying to think of a scheme in which those stakeholders will be able to come together to form a carbon neutral strategy. So I have a few more slides, but I think I've exhausted the time that I have been given to present. So I would like to stop my presentation here. Thank you for your kind attention.
So from this point on, we will move on to the time for panel discussion, including questions and answers for the presentations. Moderator will be Mr. Katsuya Yokota, Program Officer of Environmental Research Technology Development Fund. Panelists are Mr. Takahashi, Mr. Masui, Ms. Amanuma, and Mr. Fujita. So over to you, Mr. Yokota, the Program Officer. I am Yokota, Program Officer of ERTDF. I will serve as the moderator for the panel discussion. Thank you very much. So first, we have received several questions on the presentations that are given. We will be happy to take additional questions. So if you have any questions on the presentations that were given, please go ahead and state your questions in the Q&A function. If you'd like, please state your name and affiliation. And you can write your questions in English as well in the Q&A box. And we will pick the questions, and answers will be given in Japanese, but it will be simultaneously interpreted into English. So there are 4 presenters. So there are a few questions. So first, there is a common question for Mr. Takahashi and Mr. Masui. So let me read aloud this question. So in order to reduce CO2 emissions, the transformation from fossil fuels to renewable energy is envisioned, but the promotional mechanism in place for the implementation of renewable energy, for instance, securing the location or installation in consideration of biodiversity and safe disposal of material, etc. These are presumably important as well. So do we have a good outlook on each of these? For instance, the useful life of PV panel is about 20 years, as I understand, but mostly the cheap panels made in China are installed. And going forward, don't we have to consider the cost for disposing such panels? And is there a development of recycling technology that is ongoing? So Mr. Takahashi and Mr. Masui, thank you very much for your question. So on a global scale, the decarbonization measures and the SDGs impact, from that perspective, what prerequisites will be needed? From that perspective, I'd like to share my thoughts. So today I gave a short presentation. The climate change measures, especially bioenergy-related measures, would require an increase in cropland for growing such crops. But by doing so, the food production land would have to compete against the cultivation of such bioenergy crops. And also there are some spillover effects because it will have to come as afforestation as well. So there's competition, and based on our experience, 8,000 to 9,000 habitats, and also climate change scenario, the land use change scenario will have to be taken into consideration. So by doing such analysis, it was demonstrated that such land use competition would arise, and such spillover effects will be one part of renewable energy introduction. And we have done analysis on what kind of spillover effects are handled. And on the other hand, after introducing the PV or solar energy, what will be the costs of disposal? We haven't done much analysis on that, so that is another research project or issue. So perhaps Matsui-san can provide further answers in terms of global model, in terms of long-term actions. That concludes my answer. So Mr. Masui, please.
Yes, thank you for the question. So in the national analysis for renewable energy, it's not like we have unlimited potential. We also need to look at the cost. And as Mr. Takahashi said earlier, we have to consider the various constraints in considering what is the actual potential. And then look at how we can supply renewable energy. Now, we also need to look at whether we're able to protect the biodiversity that we should have. And actually, the analysis we have done is on a macro level. So when it gets down to specific ecosystems and biodiversity, we have yet to be able to do that detailed analysis. But on a national, overall nationwide level, we can see what is the potential, and then based on that potential, we have done some analysis. Also, in case of Japan, for each electricity company, they have yet to be able to transfer energy between them. And so if we can have further seamless integration of energy supply between the different power companies, and if that network starts working, what would happen? We are also trying to simulate that as well. Also, for the additional part of your question, which is about the waste, in the national model, we have yet to do a full-scale analysis. And in the question, you mentioned that low-cost panels from China, if they come in, what would happen? So in considering facilities for renewable energy, we look at what if we can source those domestically, then that would create jobs. And if you import them, you would be having an outflow of funding. So we need to look at if you want to be importing from overseas at low cost, or even if a little bit expensive, you want to source the material from domestic sources. We are also including that in our analysis as well. That's where we are. Thank you. So the next question is also for you, Mr. Masui. So you've worked on S9 and 1121. You have been working on some long-term researches through the ERDF. So what is your long-term roadmap for your research and analyses? Meaning, how many more years of research and analysis do you plan to do in order to start social implementation? If you could give a rough image, that would be very much appreciated. Yeah, thank you for that question. So when you think of social implementation, we are already starting to implement various initiatives, and we also need to implement more initiatives in order to realize a decarbonized society in time. The more research that we do, we are finding more new challenges. For example, using the ERDF, we have been working for over 20 years on research. And this is the overall perspective that I mentioned in my presentation. But analysis on the national level is not enough. We need to go into more detailed analysis by each region inside of a country. So we are trying to work on that detailed analysis. Also, talking of ecosystems, the decarbonization and ecosystems combined give rise to new challenges. And so we're also trying to incorporate that into our analysis as well. So the more research we do, the more challenges, new challenges that we are finding. And so we are working to try and resolve them. And so we are setting up new research projects. So it's almost like we are on a continuous cycle of working on these research projects. That's it for me. Thank you.
Next question is directed to Ms. Amanuma. You presented on SDGs, but do you have any rough assumptions in terms of probability of success, or is it that you don't have any particular idea in mind? Thank you for your question. So what we are proposing, the governance framework, etc., by using such framework, how much will the likelihood rise in terms of the likelihood of achieving SDGs? That's how I understood your question. In research, it's a qualitative research, so we haven't come up with data of how much percentage point it would push up the probability of success. So in a way that the government can use, we have come up with a checklist that we can do. So for instance, what kind of initiatives would raise the responsiveness? That kind of checklist we intend to create, but even if you do everything on the list, it depends on how you do it and how much budget is to be spent on each of such initiatives. So there are various variables. So by doing so, it's very difficult to come up with data to indicate how much percentage of probability would go up. Thank you very much. So there's a question directed to Mr. Fujita.
So based on the conditions given, looking at the feasibility of action plans and the necessity of the feasibility, I think that's very important. And so when you think of the feasibility of social implementation, have you done a reality check on that? So this is a question related to the feasibility of some of the actions in the plan. Thank you for that question. I think that's a very fundamental question. And I hope that we'll be able to answer that adequately. I suspect that in Japan, under the Suga administration, society has rapidly increased its interest in action, and we're now at a stage of implementation. We can certainly declare that we aim to go for carbon neutrality, but the municipalities now have a need to come up with specific action plans. But the current state is that we are lacking some of the scientific basis for those plans. And so that's why we are doing the research that we are doing. So we are working to partner with specific companies and also giving output to the municipalities and getting feedback in order to validate some of the feasibility of the actions proposed. But the checking of these scenarios and program plans, if we look at Shinji Town, that is one example of a town that has actually done that. So how much can we actually realize some of the plans in place? So through this exercise, I think that the usefulness of social implementation research will also be proved. So the research that we are doing on action plans is to really try to put together a structure for implementing plan. We believe that that's necessary. So in the interest of time, I'd like to end my answer here. Thank you. Thank you. We have still more questions, but in interest of time, we will not be able to answer all. We're not able to answer all questions. Apologies for that. And so now we'd like to briefly move into panel discussion. And the thematic track 3 actually focuses on realizing net zero in Asia and what are the climate change mitigation plan methodologies. And so that was the theme that the 4 presenters were asked to talk about to realize net zero in Asia. The presenters talked about global situations. Mr. Masui talked about Asia and also for each country. Now, countries like China have a lot of emissions. Other countries have less emissions. So we have different stages for each and different levels of enthusiasm for each country. So what do you think of that? And also for the remaining presenters, including Ms. Amanuma and Professor Fujita. Amanuma-san, you focused on Europe, especially Finland and Denmark, doing a follow-up review worldwide. And Professor Fujita, you also took the example of a Japanese example from Shinji Town. So from an Asian perspective, how would you think of realizing that? So Professor Shita, I think you've done a lot of research into Asia as well. So from that perspective, so along the theme to realize net zero in Asia, methodologies of support for implementing climate change mitigation plans, if you could focus on Asia in your comments in the panel discussion, that would be appreciated. So I'd like to talk on, I call on Mr. Takashi first.
Thank you. So one thing is when it comes, I talked about inequality of intergeneration and different regions. In terms of regional inequality or disparities, I shouldn't paint Asia in one brush, but there are other regions like Africa, which is lagging behind in terms of development, and I'm not sure if I can call Asia as one region. But in that context, the features of Asia, Japan is a country where the emissions will be quite huge, and if you take different measures, there may be some spillover effects into other countries. So unlike other regions, this region is quite characteristic. So as a result of the analyses, hopefully we can come up with a quantitative insights, and that can hopefully serve as the basis for appropriate measures to be taken, especially when you think of the measures that would span over long periods of time. It is often mentioned that depopulation or population decrease is being accelerated in certain parts of Asia. And in the next 20, 30 years, many countries will go into the phase of population decline. So even if the global model is used for the research, we should explain those elements so that we can digest the research results better. So that is all from me. Next, Amasui-san, please.
Thank you. So as Professor Fujita said earlier, you really need to include the program plan into analysis. So in addition to research, we also need to consider how to implement the measures, going back to an early question. So we are including that perspective in our research. Asia is a very diverse region, culturally, economically, and technologically. On the other hand, the horizontal partnerships between different nations is really important. An initiative in one country can actually fit very well with another nation as well. So sharing that information, having a platform for sharing information is also important when we think of developing these models. That's one thing I can say. So instead of just doing research and ending with a paper in Japan, we want to also invite researchers from other parts of Asia to help out with capacity building, so that in each country, they can also do research on the real challenges for their own country. And try and identify those problems and then come up with solutions. So we want to really work between different partners in Asia in doing our research. So that's where we are. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then Ms. Amanuma, SDGs and Asian countries, any thoughts and comments? Thank you very much. In our research, we have focused on Northern Europe or Europe. So there was a focus in that particular area. So when it comes to Asia, the lessons learned in Europe, whether that is directly applicable to Asia, including that aspect. When you think of Asia, there are different types of government. So the initiatives that take that into account, that kind of research projects will be needed perhaps. And as for Asia, there are quite a lot of developing countries. So developed countries' SDGs achievement, behind that, there are spillovers, negative spillovers into developing countries. So how to overcome such trade-offs? And as you do so, how can you create co-benefits or positive impacts? I think that's important for Asia. So from that perspective, how to reduce trade-offs, how to create synergies on that point. In IGES, we have researched on such policies, and centered around Professor Kanye of Keikyo University, we are conducting or promoting a project on that point. So hopefully we can come up with good research outcomes from that. Thank you very much. Over to Professor Fujita.
Okay, thank you. So the example from Shinchi Town was just one case study, working on smart monitoring and simulation and regional system. And actually in Indonesia, we've been working with Bogor Agricultural University to also deploy a similar approach. The difference between Japan and other Asian countries does exist, but management systems, industrial systems, supply chain, consumption, etc. These do have some similarities and common areas. So which parts can be shared as part of a system, which part are different depending on the developing process. We really need to use evidence in order to do the analysis, otherwise it will not be convincing. So smart meters, smart monitoring, we're hoping to use that technology in the research to help with that. At Bogor, we've looked at facilities inside and outside of the university. Sensors have been installed there. And the sensor systems can be installed simply and at low cost. Maybe this can be explained in the word DX or digital transformation. And DX is one interface where we can really share the knowledge and expertise we have gained in Japan. Working between university partnerships, we can involve stakeholders into the discussion. And so that way we can work between public, private, and academia partners. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We wanted to have more time for discussion, but now it's time to end the session. So I'd like to share with you my observations and what the four presenters said. There are benefits of climate change measures, and by realizing SDGs on climate change, that will have a good impact on other SDG goals. That was mentioned in the presentation. But in the questions that were raised that we did not deal with, the wind power as renewable energy and the solar panels, in order to install such facilities, if you are to cut down forests, then that will have negative impact on biodiversity and other aspects. So even if it is done for good intention, to say something extreme, maybe we need to go back to relying on nuclear energy. There's a disconnect in the nuclear cycle. So as we try to achieve net zero in Asia, Japan should serve as the model, and we need to involve Asian people to make efforts as well. But what needs to be done so that it will have not negative spillovers? So that should be more of a discussion point. And do we have time for the last key message? So if you could say something on the point that I raised, this is a panel discussion. So starting with Mr. Takahashi, could you say in one word what you thought? In one word. Well, there are various issues that are intertwined, so we need to sort them out and provide a good explanation, and that will be one role to be played by a long-term model. So with that in mind, I'd like to pursue my research further. Thank you, Professor Masui.
Well, thank you. I believe that's a very difficult homework that you've given me. So this is not something that just one researcher from one institution can take care of. It should be an all-Japan effort or a worldwide effort, getting all research institutions around the world getting together to tackle this one problem. So I do hope ERICA would work on enhancing its ERDF funding so that we can have more research going. Thank you. So Ms. Amanuma, please go ahead.
So I was fortunate enough to participate in this session, and I learned a lot in terms of net zero related research. So going forward, I'd like to continue my studies in this area, and hopefully we can cooperate with other experts in this area. And with that in mind, I'd like to pursue research activities. Thank you. Professor Fujita, please.
So circular economy, nature positive, and also carbon neutrality. We definitely need to think of the technology around that. And for net zero and carbon zero, this really calls for social transformation or regional transformation. These are major driving forces. The question is how much science can contribute to that initiative. I believe that we are questioned on how much we can contribute. So partnering between research groups is necessary. And also we need to have a closer distance with municipalities so that we can work on social implementation and also partnerships. So groups could work to actively visualize the outcomes of their research. I think we are at that point in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, with the cooperation of various experts, we were able to get a lot of insights on net zero in Asia. So going forward, we will continue to work on solving various problems, and as we do so, we hope to see progress towards net zero in Asia. So thank you once again to all the lecturers and the participants. Thank you very much for your questions. It's time to finish the discussion, so we will end the panel discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Mr. Yokota, Program Officer, and presenters, Professor Takahashi, Masui, Amanuma, and Fujita. Thank you very much. So once again, please give a big round of applause online to the presenters. So with that, we will close the meeting hosted by ERCA for ISAP 2024 theme-based meeting to realize net zero in Asia, methodologies of support for implementing climate change mitigation plans. Thank you for your participation, taking time out of your busy schedule. Please fill out the survey that will be presented as you exit Zoom. We will make use of your input, so please provide your answers to the survey. Thank you very much once again, and now you're free to leave Zoom now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.